Hello there, good day, and welcome to the Fhtf Rhtr podcast, Forgetting How to Forget and Remembering How to Remember. I'm your host and uncle, and my name is Andy Christopher Bear Jr. Today, we're here to talk about an incident that occurred in the early 2000s. It is referred to as the Zaki-Biam killing. The Zaki-Biam killings refers to an unfortunate event that happened in Benue State. As the story goes, people who were thought to be members of the Nigerian military were killed in a part of Benue State. As a matter of fact, 19 of them were killed and their bodies were strewn by the roadside. In retaliation, the Nigerian military descended on that locality, sending military personnel with guns and ammunition. And for a period of about a week, they attacked, killed, destroyed, and laid siege to the communities along Zaki-Biam, Vase, and Weji axis. Today, we want to revisit this story. We want to find out why such a thing could have happened. We want to know some of the details that may have been missed, and we want to get down to the root of the matter. As our guest, we have somebody who has documented scores of material on this particular topic, as well as other incidences that have occurred in the Middle Belt and Benue State in particular. His name is Professor Chris Orngu, and he's a most revered professor of history and strategic studies in the Benue State University in Benue State. Ladies and gentlemen, I want us to watch this episode with a heavy heart, but with learning ears, as we find out about the Zaki-Biam killings. What happened, why did it happen, and what has happened since then. Let's give it a watch. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Very nice to meet you.
My pleasure too.
I'm honored to have this conversation with you.
Right.
The moment I spoke to Dr. Shedrack, he told me immediately that you're the one I was to speak to on this issue.
That's okay. Dr. Shedrack Okuma is one of our budding scholars with a high level of intellectual capacity and very versatile. So we've done a lot of collaborative interactions in research activities and all that. So I'm not surprised.
I'm very happy to meet you in person. This is the Fhtf podcast, and RHTR. Basically, what it stands for is Forgetting How to Forget and Remembering How to Remember. We are of the opinion that too many important events in Nigeria's history have been swept under the rug, and because we are unable to remember these things, we are not conversant with facts that are important to us. So that's why we have come to you. And ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Professor Chris Orngu, and we are here particularly because he's a professor of history at Benue State University, and particularly he has done extensive work on the Zaki-Biam killings that happened at the beginning of the Fourth Republic. So if you could please, sir, explain to us what that unfortunate event is in Nigeria's history.
Yeah, I see that event as a very unfortunate aspect of Nigeria's socio-political history. It occurred at a time that Nigeria had embraced democracy, which is what we call the Fourth Republic. And given that the country had been administered under a succession of military regimes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there were a series of pent-up anger, and the democratization of the country now came with the democratization of conflicts. And so democracy now provided the opportunity for various social groups within the country to express themselves. And that was what saw the upsurge of militia violence in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta. And of course, that was where we started having the OPC, Odua People's Congress, and the Arewa People's Congress. So it was like the emergence of a new democracy prepared the grounds for the democratization of conflict. So the country became heated up because people now had the opportunity under a democratic atmosphere to express themselves. Now, what happened in Zaki-Biam,
Yes, sir.
Was an unfortunate episode in the history of intergroup relations between the thief and their neighbors, the Jubu. There had been series of crises arising from contestations over land resources, but particularly over that of indigenship, indigenous settler phenomenon.
Yes,
Whereas the Jukun were laying claims to some geographical enclaves in the same way that the Fhtf had also done that. But of course, the intergroup relations between the two ethnic groups had existed without much skirmishes. But of course, you know that when there are communal issues, even within the Fhtf enclave,
yes.
you are bound to have boundary disputes, or rather land disputes, if you like. Now, the fear that the Fhtf were already beginning to dominate the geographical landscape of Jukun area became a very strong issue of contention. And the Jukun had to rise up to the occasion to confront the Fhtf, with whom they had coexisted over a very long period of time. So the speculations were that the Jukun now resorted to deploying, some mercenaries, and the mercenaries were suspected to be military personnel, who were serving in Taraba. And this was so speculated, and it took some center stage in the analysis of the issues, because the sophistication of the firearms used by the mercenaries indicated very clearly that they were of the military. So usually there are reprisal attacks when situations like this occur.
Yes, sir.
And so clearly what led to the explosive encounter,
yes, sir,
was an accusation that 19 soldiers were killed by the Fhtf. And these 19 soldiers were suspected to be militia, mercenaries that were deployed by the Jukun, to launch attacks on the Fhtf sites, particularly, the border areas, the boundary areas at the Zaki-Biam and the Basi. So, on that fateful day, the military came under the guise of peacekeeping, and they invited the villagers for a peace talk. And so the villagers, dropped their guards and embraced the peace talk. And then all of a sudden, the military now opened fire, and it led to massive killing. It was a retaliatory, exercise, as a matter of fact. And it didn't stop at that. It extended to other places. The invasion became widespread and cut across Vase, Zaki-Biam, and of course other neighboring. So the level of destruction was quite catastrophic, and the casualties were quite high, and the number was unprecedented, in terms of.
So, Prof, we'll get to those, because we want to. One of the goals of this exercise is to ensure that we can, as much as possible, explain what fact is and shed light on what the narratives currently are. Because although there's very little representation of this particular event in the media, if you go to search for it, you would find very little online. There is an official story, and the official story has certain buzzwords, it has certain key factors that have to be taken into consideration. Listening to you already, I've heard a couple of things that have caught my attention. For example, you said democratization of conflict, which is what does that, to help our viewers, what does that mean exactly? What do we mean?
Well, you see, democracy creates a liberal environment that allows participation, in the process of governance. It also allows for expression, freedom of expression.
Yes.
And it also allows for freedom of movement. And then, in fact, every aspect of fundamental human rights, to the extent that the capacity to even call the authority to order is embedded in the doctrine of democracy. And again, democratization also implies that everybody is a participant in the process of governance. And so when you democratize conflict, it therefore implies that you have created the freedom for participation in conflict. When conflict becomes, an instrument for expression, of pent-up anger. So you cannot suppress, under military dictatorship, conflict feelings can be suppressed, but under a democracy,
because of the rule of law, you have to approach
it differently. You understand. So there's a freedom of expression in different dimensions, So we may not want to say that, there is always an institution to check excesses in whatever we do in a democracy. But the most important thing is that when everything is democratized, it opens room for everybody to participate.
And that's very instructive. You said something else which is interesting. The official story is that, like you said, 19 soldiers were killed, and so in retaliation, we'll go to that later on. Saying that the Nigerian army retaliated against Nigerian people is an anomaly in itself. But you said that even though there is an idea that militia were involved, mercenaries were involved, you said that the sophistication of firearms and tactics makes it almost clear that there was some military involvement. Could you expand
military
on that?
Conspiracy, because ordinarily, you see, when you have a communal conflict to the point of violence, the weaponry deployed in the violent attacks, usually suggests that there are limited, exposure in terms of when you have then guns, bows and arrows, you can always, from a common sense appreciation, explain that these are communal
communities lashing out.
But when you have AK-47 and other other military weapons of massive destruction, high destructive capability, you begin to define the context, of the involvement of a military institution in the affair. So now if you look at the level of destruction, it was sufficient to explain that it was beyond mere militia or community engagement, military encounter. So we had, over time, had skirmishes between communities, between groups, in and around the thief-making areas. And so, but we know the extent to which military weaponry is deployed. It had never attained that level. So that was what led to that the speculation around the conspiracy theory involving the military, who became mercenaries, in carrying out the destructive. So that was exactly the point. So even though it was theoretical, it suggested very instructively that some level of military assistance
was involved.
Yes. So that's the point. So when you mentioned in 19, I want to tell you that up to this point, it has not been clearly established because there is always this point that we try to interrogate. Military personnel.
Yes.
As we speak today, we have not been able to have a very comprehensive profile of the military personnel that were involved. And so I think the military still owes Nigeria, particularly the Nigerian army, still owes the thief and the entire Nigerian nation a proper explanation around that which has not been properly explained.
Let's expand, because what you're saying is, if there were 19, then we should know the names.
Yeah.
We should know their battalion.
Exactly.
We should know their ranks.
Exactly.
And that is still up in the air.
It's still, yeah. So their profile, their respective profiles have not been adequate, have not been provided.
Which means the onus is actually on the government now.
On the government.
To actually establish.
And the military authorities.
That actually occurred.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting what you said, because this leads us to this particular question. We are here with you because of the work you have done on this particular topic.
Mm.
Would you say, or what would your thoughts be to the notion that documenting this particular event has not been a process that has been encouraged? What is the attitude of the Nigerian state towards bringing this up, talking about it, trying to get these answers? Are they welcoming? Do they want to listen, or do they want to brush it aside? How does that happen?
Yeah, I'm happy that you have raised this question, because the Nigerian state, or rather the Nigerian society at large,
Yes.
does not pay adequate attention to the documentation of events. Now, even if you look at the activities that occurred during the Nigerian Civil War,
Yes.
they lack a comprehensive chronological synthesis in terms of presentation. Now, what we see about the Nigerian Civil War, which has remained the most catastrophic outing of the Nigerian state
Today,
you see pieces of speculative submissions here and there, and in most cases you can find biased presentations arising from who is documenting and who is not. Now, in this situation, unfortunately, a lot of people have written very extensively, and I'm surprised you say that these documentations are not in the public domain. I remember that 10 years of Zaki-Biam invasion, we even had a conference here, on Zaki-Biam invasion. And we harvested papers that were published into a compendium of perspectives and submissions on this unfortunate episode. But unfortunately, again, you will realize that the readership culture has been quite poor, and then people are simply much more interested in listening, or rather documenting or reading issues that relate to political activities in the country. So those issues that touch on the fundamentals of our existence are usually not given adequate attention, even in scholarship. There's sometimes, for instance, right now, research activities are more inclined to look at farmers' headers crisis.
Yeah.
As soon as this thing is swept under the carpet, we'll now move to another
something else.
Because we are living in a country where diversionary politics has remained the main thing, the main driver of people's engagement. So once a phenomenon emerges at a particular point in time, it engages attention of those who see themselves as critical stakeholders. And once it is overtaken by another event, it is conveniently swept under the carpet. Now, what I'm saying is that the Zaki-Biam or the Vase crisis has remained one of the most disturbing in the history of Thief Nation, and especially because of its involvement of the military.
Yeah.
And my submission during the invasion was basically on the contradictions of the military factor in conflict resolution in Nigeria. Because the military is not expected to be deployed for the purpose of conflict resolution or conflict management. And so that also is a contradiction, and that contradiction was and is instituted by the Nigerian government, to the extent that I'm happy you also know that the military came fully armed,
yes,
and then deceived civilians who dropped their guards and killed them, defenseless civilians. I mean, that is the height of injustice, height of, criminality. And so there is a lot that we need to do in terms of revisiting our yesterday and connecting our yesterday with today to be able to understand the trajectory of the history of violence and conflicts in the country. So I agree with you absolutely. Yeah, I'm telling you that it has not been given adequate attention, both in scholarship and the other aspect of documentation of our history. And this also explains the challenge of collective amnesia, because when people tend to collectively forget their past, it also creates a lot of problems. So the problem still persists, but it has been overtaken by a new dimension of conflict, and so attention has been shifted to that at the moment. But that is not to say that we are definitely not going to get back to that, because these are the foundations that have built up to the complexity and the dynamism of the challenges that we have in the country today.
True.
Yeah.
So, at the risk of being repetitive, since you've come through this angle, and you are a professor of history, while expounding on this issue, you mentioned particularly the Fhtf, which is as far as Nigerian demography is concerned, they say we are number 7, but in truth, let's say we're 7. Let's say we're the 7th largest ethnic group.
I do not even subscribe to that. My recent research activities have pointed to the fact that the Fhtf nation should be about the 3rd. The reason being, maybe we must have to look. Let's take a majestic swipe, because we must not continue to be selective in dealing with some of these issues. Now, when you look at the Hausa Fulani, how can you combine 2 ethnic groups to refer to them as a majority?
3, because they are the Kanuri.
You understand? And then again, even within the context of this demographic analysis, you'll be able to realize that there are pockets of little ethnic groups that have lost their identity completely.
Oh, true.
And so if you look at it from the context of, heterogeneity, cultural, we are culturally homogeneous.
Yeah.
And so hardly do you find an ethnic group in this country as homogeneous as the Fhtf.
Yes.
And then if you look at the geographical spread, the Fhtf should have at least 3 states, if not 4. But if you look at the population of the Fhtf across, we're over 7 million.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
But the last count was about 9.8 million.
Thank you very much. So, which ethnic group in Nigeria can conveniently boast of that number? So, if we want to be realistic in terms of presenting our facts and figures, the Fhtf nation should be about the 3rd. And that is an argument that I am pushing for. So, if for any reason we want to, to step back a little, we can conveniently manage to accept to be number 4.
Number 4.
Which is not correct.
I like that. Very interesting. The reason I put that forward is because the Jukun people historically are very known. The Jukun Empire is one of the great empires that comes from what is now known as Nigeria. You mentioned particularly that the Jukun and the Fhtf have certain contentious. Could we enumerate them? Obviously, land will be.
I told you land is one. Basically land. And then I told you about indigenous settler phenomenon.
Okay.
Because if you go to Logo, for instance, you'll find that there is a place called Akwana. Because of their trade in salt making, the Jukun occupied that place, and it is still within Fhtf land.
Oh yeah.
You understand? So now the nature of intergroup relations before the emergence of colonial rule was such that there was abundant natural resources, and it was possible for anybody to go to any place and establish. Once you respect the ownership, there was no problem. You need to, respecting the ownership implied that you needed to key into the cultural values, the social norms and everything that indicated the basic identity of the people within which you needed to coexist. The Etulu found themselves around the river banks because they were essentially fishermen, and the Jukun too at BNC. So you will now see that the Jukun have been found within the interior aspect of Fhtf enclave.
Just to clarify for those listening, Abinsi is a town.
Yes,
Benue State.
in Benue State.
That is in the middle of Makurdi and Goma.
It is in Gwe local government. I mean, Goma local government area.
So it is right in the middle.
It's right in the middle of Chiefland.
So with that, you can say that interrelationships have not is possible. It is something
it has always been there.
Happened.
It has always been there. It has always been there. Some of these skirmishes were orchestrated by colonial incursion, because the deliberate attempt to introduce the political systems that would enable a convenient administrative system for the British also created these challenges, because they needed to start creating chiefdoms and all of that. And creating these chiefdoms also implied that, certain people were compelled to be administered under chiefs that were appointed by the military by the colonial administrators. And then there were cultural dissimilarities in the process. And these cultural dissimilarities now started manifesting some forms of conflicts in terms of cultural socialization and all that. But let's get back to the basics. The basics has been that most essentially contestation over lands and then contestation over indigenship. Basically, these were the two. But then with time, contestation over political positions. For instance, the Tiv population in Taraba, for instance, were becoming increasingly influential. And then, number is very, very important. But you see, the factor of political marginalization, which the Tiv have consistently suffered in Taraba State, has also led to the manifestation of these skirmishes. Because the Tiv would feel that, look, we pay taxes, we contribute to the economy, we participate in every other political and social activities, but we are denied the opportunity,
this particular,
you understand, to ascend to certain political positions. So the grievances, like I said, manifest essentially from land contestation, indigenous settler phenomenon, political marginalization, if you like. So basically, these are the three things.
Yeah. And they flow from each other.
Yeah.
Okay. This is very interesting, because now you've talked about the historical narrative, you talked about the tribal narrative, and you've also talked about the identity problem.
Yeah.
You mentioned something which I would want to take you back to. It's called the Zaki-Biam Massacre, but it was not just Zaki-Biam that was affected.
Yeah, it's true. Vasi
was affected. In certain places, it is reported that there were no killings, but the loss of property was also quite orchestrated. In fact, there are interesting reports in Kiado, for example. They said what is reported is that the military came, and that by then, military personnel from Benue State had gone to secure the area, but that in order to satiate the invading military force, they allowed them to destroy property before they left, even though they didn't kill anybody. So it's almost as though it goes back to that revenge word, which is they came looking to satisfy their need for, or to quench their anger. Is there any truth to those rumors?
Yeah, you see, I agree. The destruction was widespread. In fact, basically the key areas affected were Zaki-Biam, Vasi, Beji. And of course, it extended to Anyi. Yeah. So what they did, and some of us witnessed these things when we went to, they came in their trucks and just fired sporadically, not aiming at anybody. So, but the essence was to, one, instill fear for the purpose of deterrence. Then two, to destroy and leave a lasting impression, So apart from the killings at Zaki-Biam, Beji and Vasi, they went to other places and did this purposely, at least to establish their military superiority,
Yeah.
and also inform the people that if it happens, we'll come again. And that is the theory of deterrence. And they were able to do that very effectively, and they sent these fears down the shivers, down the spines, of the dwellers in these areas, who scampered away, and some have never gone back to those places again. So that singular military action, with its concomitant implications on the psychological makeup of the people, actually led to their occupational displacements, apart from population displacement.
To this day.
To this day, some people have just abandoned their ancestral homes, for fear of maybe the unknown.
Okay, this is at this point now. We'll just take a break just for purpose. So, Professor, thank you so much again for giving us this opportunity, and we are learning so much, which is the idea. We claim to want to educate, to inform, and then, if we can, entertain.
Yeah.
I happen to be a writer. I'm an author, and I brought one of my books as a gift to you for this lovely gesture.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
I mentioned that because I'm fascinated by pictures and narratives.
Yeah.
And one of the pictures that I got while researching this topic was that the killings themselves, or the attacks, started at the very moment that a mass funeral was held for the so-called 19 was held in Abuja. And while the speeches were going on from President Obasanjo and from the Army Chief of Staff, the killings started here in Benue State. It was almost as though they were waiting for, I won't say an order because that's not what it is, and we are not trying to be sensationalist, but it is the kind of incident that looks eerily scary, because it is almost as though while the people here were waiting to hear what the federal government thought about it, they saw people dressed as though they were sent by the federal government to do something that was completely different from what the federal government was saying on TV. Does that picture have any credibility to it?
No, you see, actually that scenario was subjected to a lot of critical analysis. In the first place, the Benue state government had already apologized to the federal government for the killing of the 19 soldiers. And some of us felt that apology was hastily given, because the state government needed to establish the genuineness
of the issue.
But it did that. A lot of people were not happy about that apology, the way it came, because the likes of one Director, she's so rested, was also very critical about that apology. And some of us also made our position clearly known that it shouldn't have been that early, because even that apology clearly indicated that the government had already acknowledged. Yeah, it was an admission of the killings, because in whatever situation, we expected that a proper forensic analysis and proper interrogation needed to have been done. And that would have been initiated by the state government in the first place, because it happened here in the States.
Yes.
Now, the failure of the state government to do that at that point in time, and then rushing to give an apology, actually placed Benue State on a very precarious situation.
Okay.
And so even if the military did that, without any official permission, even though I'm not excusing, I'm not rationalizing that irrationality, it is possible that in fact, a lot of people blame the action on the hasty apology given by the state government. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is that whatever it was, the action remains condemnable.
Yes.
In the history of so it was not proper. So let us not anchor that. We can't rationalize it. It was an irrational action. So I feel very strongly that the military should still carry out a proper investigation and find out those who were behind that act, and then bring the perpetrators to book in the interests of constitutional democracy.
It's interesting you say this, because now that you even talk about the government carrying out such an action hastily, to this day, there are conflicting reports on almost every number given. They use figures like between 100 to 250 people dead, between 400 to 600. However, if we go by what the total estimate is, those killings claimed about the lives of about 2,500 people, which in terms of scale, that is quite unheard of, even when you compare it to other things that have happened in the country. It seems as though this one, and forgive me for being repetitive with this question, but it seems as though this one was a little too much. It was a little wrong. There's just something about it that still has to be investigated, even beyond what is written on paper.
Yeah, I agree with you. You see, it also has to do with the value system that defines the kind of political morality in a decayed system. BBC reported 200.
The BBC?
Yeah, reported that 200 were killed. I have the documents. Now, in a system where government does not provide adequate data,
yes,
or information, especially on matters that relate to life, should tell you how unserious government has always been at all levels, at the local government, at the state government, and at the federal government level. The Nigerian society is a decayed one that does not place premium on the sanctity of lives. Political correctness is what drives the thinking of Nigerian political leaders. Now, sometimes deliberately, and because they are always completely disconnected from the realities of the people, when they are confronted with the need to provide information, they just concoct anything and give.
Okay.
And unknowingly to them, it is what information they give that matters most, even in terms of policy direction and in terms of policy action. So for me, I feel that the idea of giving conflicting figures rests squarely with officials of government. Now, come to think of it, have we got any official report from the military, from the security apparatus? And so the military apparatus is also subsumed in the thinking of the political leadership. And so the political leadership can always compel the security apparatus to reduce the number so that tension is controlled. And that is what I refer to as political correctness. To the extent that the level of catastrophe is downplayed, and in a situation where government begins to manage information in the interest of political correctness, there is something fundamentally wrong with the moral fabrics of that system. And that is exactly the situation that we have found ourselves. Now look at the entire Nigerian state. From Boko Haram, the Chibok girls, came as after a point, the thing just died down. And nobody is even talking about the exactitude of the effects of the damage
that
was done. So it is a systematic problem that cuts across all levels of governance in Nigeria. And so insecurity is also, sustains because of our inability to be able to deal with the root causes and challenges of security. So when you don't provide accurate data, how do you deal with situations? So I agree with you absolutely that the damage and the loss of life and property in the whole episode has been completely and deliberately underrepresented and underreported for political correctness. Yeah.
That's very instructive, deliberate, which now leads me to, this is the part where we stay true to our idea of educating, because I want people who are viewing this, we're not trying to say we're giving the entire story, but we want people who are viewing this to have this is the podcast as a point of reference, and we want them to have reference points that they can go to.
Yeah.
So we want to give you the floor now, in maybe the next minute or 3. If you could tell us, should somebody want to know about what happened in Zaki-Biam, what do we look for? Where do we read? What libraries do we go to? What books do we buy? What people do we research?
Yeah, first of all, like I told you,
yes,
we have a challenge of readership culture. You know, my PhD, this is the socio-political conflicts in Nigeria from 1953 to 2005, which also captures this episode.
Yes.
It is contained in my thesis, which has been published. And it's in various libraries across the country. I just told you about the BBC report, which I have a copy. And then I told you about the conference that was organized, you know, in commemoration of 10 years of Zaki-Biam conference,
yes,
where we harvested over 20 chapters with very interesting perspectives of the episodes. And a lot of other. So generally, for us, we believe that interacting with the people who are direct victims, you know, there are people who have lost their beloved ones, people have lost their livelihoods and they are still alive. Then there are people who have been displaced occupationally, you know, they are still alive. So interacting with the people in the geographical space that has been directly affected will also give you plenty of information that you need. Unfortunately, the level of reportage conducted by our journalists today has dropped very drastically. Yeah, because most journalists are no longer interested in investigating. You know, so but social media platforms are usually there, but in most cases their stories are concocted, and in most cases everybody is an author on the social media. And so the availability of abundant information on the social media platform has also created a lot of problems because of contending perspectives and contending submissions on issues. To that extent, we may have no choice than going back to read the few books that we have, and also going to interact with the people within the geographical space that were either eyewitnesses or who are directly affected, so that we'll be able to get more information to enable us to establish the validity of our historical claims to that effect. Now, I know that if you go to the net, you may not be able, and then again, you always I wrote refugees in my own country or something like that. It was about the displacement that arose from that military invasion. So a lot of people wrote, Avav, he was of the Union, so rest in peace, that he wrote very extensively on that. So we have a lot of literature, you know, that if you look at the content of this literature, you'll be able to derive a lot of information. So anybody who is interested in getting to know more about the military invasion, we have a lot of things to do.
That can be read. So if you have the chance, or if you are so pushed, you can come to the Benue State University Library and you will find
readable materials on
literature on this. There was a panel that was instituted to investigate and to report on this. Before I even ask specific questions about the panel, the Justice Okechukwu Okene panel, Can you educate us on that, sir?
Yeah, you see, generally these panels, I'm sorry to say, panels are usually political interventions to just ensure that tension is managed. And at the end of the day, the recommendations of these panels are hardly implemented. They are always left on the shelves. Beginning from, look at all the constitutional conferences that we have had in this country. So to me, as a matter of fact, I do not believe in
these panels.
I don't believe in them. In most cases, it creates platforms for political patronage, for people to be given responsibilities and paid. So they don't deal with the real issues. Look at the Oputa Justice, Oputa panels and all that came on by the return of democracy in 1999. It didn't lead to anything.
Oh, yes.
So for me, I don't take those things seriously. You may waste your emotions. You may waste your time trying to explain situations and expecting that there is going to be a judicial intervention. Unfortunately, it is not going to be anything. So the same thing applied here. Nothing has actually come out of that. So to me, I feel that it was just a deliberate political intervention that was intended to create an environment and a sense of fulfillment.
It's interesting you say this because specifically it was said that the Obasanjo government reluctantly set up the panel. So even though it is not something that has, because now listening to you, I understand what you mean in the sense that the panel does not have judicial authority. It does not have precedent, so it is not equal to a court of law's pronouncement.
No, not at all.
And then to add insult on injury, the findings were never reported.
And even if they were, like I've made reference to other, they wouldn't have been implemented, even if they were in favor of any of the affected
people. That's very instructive. Obviously, no thanks to the panel.
Not at all.
There was a long-running episode on compensation that was to be given to the I think before we even come to the compensation, to give not their due, but to be as level-headed with the reporting. Two apologies were offered. The Chief of Army Staff at the time, Lieutenant General Luka Yusuf, he gave an apology to Benue State for what had occurred. I should ask, did this apology include accepting the responsibility for giving the orders, or was it simply another political statement?
Permit me to qualify that apology as a political subterfuge. The truth of the matter is that there was no remorse at all. There was no remorse, and those who reported the apology were struggling almost in vain to make the statement sound like an apology. There was an army activity that held in Makurdi, and so during which the Chief of Army Staff tersely referred to the killings and regretted it, but not with that intense level of remorsefulness. So honestly speaking, we just wanted to create a political capital out of that statement. It was not truly an apology. I'm telling you the truth, it wasn't, and I stand by my word. It wasn't an apology in the true sense of it.
The president that followed Obasanjo, which again will give credence to what you're saying, because these killings happened in the year 2001. Rhtr was elected in 2007, and he visited the state and apologized, which is the Okechukwu panel I talked about published their findings in 2003, and it was in 2007 that
the president came to speak on the issue, which almost gives it the afterthought image. But, and I want to ask this carefully because it's a serious issue, but with the president doing something like that, because now, because of how he passed on, we have a very favorable view of Maria Yar'Adua as a president. We see him from a different light compared to many of our leaders in this. But, and does that action actually, did it give any kind of solace to the cries of the people to say that the president himself came down to Benue State to address this issue?
No, he didn't come specifically to address the issue. Let me tell you something. Yeah. There's everything good about Yar'Adua's administration.
Yes.
It is quite unfortunate that he didn't live long to clear the mess. But I give you a very good example of his determination to correct the wrongs in the Niger Delta when he introduced the amnesty program. And he followed up. He followed the amnesty program, with action. Now, if he had given an apology and followed, that apology with an action, I would have given him that credit. But mere pronouncements, like I said, did not really heal the wounds. As a matter of fact, even after the Civil War, we had the 3 R's, and deliberate policies were initiated and implemented by the federal government to ensure national integration. Apart from the fact that Gowon proclaimed the no victor, no vanquished, and also extended an olive branch in a diplomatic overture to accommodate everybody that was, alienated during the war. I mean, deliberate steps were taken to practicalize this integration. So, if the federal government had at any point realized that the people were maltreated, what steps had the federal government taken to ensure that justice was served, even by way of compensation? So, I don't believe in cosmetics and window dressing political sloganeering. They do not translate to practical
steps.
Yeah, that's it.
Now that you've led us this way, and you use the word compensation, there is a report that compensation was actually paid. Let me say what the reporting is, and then we hear. The reporting says that the victims collectively demanded the sum of 41 billion naira, and that eventually it was pushed down to about 15 billion naira. And the Nigerian government claims that about 8 billion of that was paid. What are your thoughts on?
I think these are speculations that sometimes generate a lot of problems. In the first place, the victims did not make any demands. The demand for compensation was made by Alexander Gadi under the platform of Benue Development Movement.
Okay.
So he was able to extract that promise of compensation, which was awarded by the courts. Anyway.
Okay.
It was not by the government. Now, the political actors in Tivland politicized the pronouncement of compensation to the extent that some even raised a question of the competence of Alexander Gadi to pursue the compensation of the victims of the military invasion.
Oh, that's sad.
Unfortunately, again, because Gadi was from Bandika, they said that Gadi was not even from Sacra Axis. So, but they refused to realize that his was an umbrella with the name and style Benue Development Movement, and Sankara Axis was a component or a microcosm of Benue State. But the long and short of the whole thing is that the compensation was politicized by the political actors within Tivland. And to that extent, no success was made of it. I tell you very instructively that it was the political actors of thief extraction that frustrated the compensation.
Wow.
Yeah. So no compensation was.
Did not get anything.
They didn't get anything.
This is.
No, you can interact with Mike Roundaka. He was the number one law officer of the country when the courts gave
time,
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was the Attorney General.
Yeah.
Wow. We do have a few. We have a few newspaper headlines that we just want to run by you before we go to the last part of the interview, because reporting, especially in today's day and age, where we have started to become a little more knowledgeable about propaganda, understanding what buzzwords can do, trying to understand what conditioning really is.
Yeah.
One of the first headlines that we have is from Human Rights Watch, which says Nigerian soldiers massacre civilians in revenge attack. And we mentioned this earlier, but just briefly, that headline in itself is strange. I think the only time where you can justify such a thing would be if the people involved were not Nigerians, to say that it was a revenge attack. How does a headline...
I already said it. You see, it also... You see, news reporting fundamentally dwells on the philosophy of agenda setting. And then the content should also function to radicalize the consciousness of the people and to also place them on their alert to be able to see things beyond mere propaganda. Now, like I told you, my presentation was on the contradiction of the military in conflict management.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how do you even mobilize the military to manage conflicts? It is wrong. The role, the functionality of the military is contained in the Constitution.
Yeah, they defend the borders.
And then territorial integrity, and also work in tune, to quell insurrection and all of that. Now, when there is a conflict between two ethnic groups or social groups, if you like,
Yes.
the military is not expected to be mobilized into action. And so if that reportage carried that banner headline, it was intended to alert the people to the fact that there was an anomaly.
There was something.
You understand?
So this in itself is actually carries its own agenda.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. That's very instructive.
Yeah.
We have another headline which talks about the Nigerian army apologizing, and this now comes to what you said, because the number that was included here, they said they apologized for the killing of 100 people.
You can see that is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened.
I can tell. This other headline is they say that when you refuse to learn from history, you are doomed to repeat. Zaki-Biam has faced some other problems. I will not use the word recently. This is 2025, but sometime in 2017, 2018, they faced other issues again where they were killings. Please, could you expand on what those things were, and if they have any connection at all?
Yeah, you see, there's what is called the contagion theory. It tries to explain how conflict situations can can snowball into more serious
into avalanche.
Avalanche system. So the fact that conflicts had been militarized in that axis, created a problem, because the people had now come face to face, you understand, and then the militarization of that conflict had already created a lasting impression that will continue to affect that area. Look at I keep making reference to the Nigerian Civil War. Look at, as soon as democracy came back in 1999, there was the RAF, who was Rike's massive movement for the actualization of the sovereign state of Biafra.
Yes.
And then you have the IPOB. So because the experience has been so deep-seated and it is historically rooted that the people themselves have become intensely militarized because of their experiences over time. So that singular action of the military in invading the civilian communities of these areas now exposed them to a new way of life and has left a lasting impression on the socialization process of the people. So it is always better to avoid a situation than allowing it to happen, especially when it is going to have a multiplier effect on the people. So I try to connect this sad experience of the people of Sankara, to this idea of this military invasion. No matter how we try to disconnect it, we may just be doing that in vain. The truth of the matter is that the Nigerian military has created a scenario, and that scenario has become deep-seated in that axis. And it is very difficult to
take it out
to
of the
take it
psyche.
out. Yes,
So the children who are born with that,
they were born into that fear, and they have imbibed the culture of that fear, and they will continue to be in that fear. So that is the psychological dimension.
Yes.
So there are people who ordinarily, because of that invasion, tried to acquire some form of crude military training in readiness for any action that may occur in the future. Now, this military training, has prepared them for any form of, attack. So they are ready to attack anytime.
They are like militant people.
So they are militant. That's the truth. So these are the issues that we're talking about.
Just the last newspaper headline, and this is not so much about the headline because it's from the New York Times, and says the Nigerian army is set to massacre hundreds of civilians. The problem of reporting in Nigeria, which is, during my research for this, I found much more in foreign articles and in foreign writings than I could from Nigerian newspapers. And is that problem? What do you think of that? Do you think that problem is deliberate? Do you think it is something that can be tackled, or do you think it's just a case that we are, as a people, there's some apathy where we no longer?
No, it's not a matter of apathy. Let me tell you something. The reporting houses we have in Nigeria have become very seriously incapacitated. Reason being that most times the public or the owners of these publishing houses do this strictly for political reasons. Beginning from when Nnamdi Azikiwe established his West African pilot in 1948, down to even when Abiola established his Concord, where he ended.
Oh, yes.
Even Iwanya's champion, where he ended.
Yes.
And of course, even the nation of Tinubu and TVC, where they are ended. So they are established purely for political reasons. They are not established for the purpose of journalistic
integrity.
Journalistic integrity and all of that. So the foreign reporters, like
yes, sir,
are always more professional. Of course, they are limited in terms of the extent to which they can access information. And so in most cases, or rather in some cases, they try to be speculative, but they try to give a report in order to be able to stimulate further research, you understand, so that you'll be able to do that. So, but what I'm trying to say here is that the truth of the matter is that the media culture in Nigeria has been completely dislocated and situationalized within the premise of serving political interest, to the extent that sometimes, and that is why you have both the government and then the private. So the government will always try as much as possible to project the government in a positive light, and then the private will try as much as possible to moderate in order not to offend the government. And then again, there's a challenge of NBC.
Oh, yes.
And then the NBC will always, as much as possible, ensure that reportage is moderated in order that government image does not suffer. So these are some of the critical issues that affect the operational environment of media reportage in Nigeria. And so those that operate from outside of the country have some level of independence, to the extent that they enjoy the latitude to be able to report more freely than the local ones.
All right. So thank you. That's the end of the segment. So we can.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The most unfortunate story, any way you look at it. The amount of lives lost, property destroyed, and the internally displaced persons created by that singular event. We learned a lot from Prof. We learned, for example, there are young people who have grown up with the knowledge and consciousness of violence in that area. We also learned that conflict is not exactly new to those people. Neither is it new to the Nigerian population. However, there is a way to manage conflict, and there are things that could have been done to solve some of the problems that have grown into a Hydra today. We hope, however, that we can learn from this. We hope that we have told a good story of this incident. We call on anyone watching, if you have a different perspective on this story, would like to hear it. Tell us in the comment section. If you lived through it, if you know somebody who has lived through it, share your experiences with us. Once again, we would like to pay our respects to those who lost their lives and to the people who lost loved ones during that terrible incident. Thank you for being with us on this episode. We'll see you next time on the Fhtf Rhtr podcast. Forgetting how to forget, remembering how to remember. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe. See you next time.